Highway 16, the Highway of Tears. A place where truckers say the darkness has a life of its own. Engines die without warning. Shapes appear in the middle of the road, and sometimes the people you stop for aren't really there. Tonight, you'll hear 10 of the most disturbing trucker encounters ever reported on this road. Real stories from drivers who swore they'd never take this route again. Before we start, make sure you subscribe, because once you hear what happens on this highway after midnight, you'll understand why so many never speak about it again. Let's begin. I've been driving long haul for almost 20 years, mostly out of Alberta into northern BC. You learn to respect the quiet up there, the kind of quiet that sits in the passenger seat with you when the radio dies and the road disappears under fog. This happened on Highway 16, the stretch folks call the Highway of Tears. I'd heard the stories, but like every other driver who's been behind the wheel too long, I chalked most of it up to loneliness, fatigue, and wind playing tricks through the trees. It was just after 12:40 a.m., freezing rain tapping a soft, steady rhythm on my windshield. The asphalt looked like a sheet of black ice, polished and waiting for the wrong move. My heater buzzed low, barely cutting the cold that kept seeping in through the cab floor. Lumber stacked behind me, 70,000 pounds of it. Enough weight to kill me if I hit the brakes wrong. The road was empty. No taillights, no oncoming rigs. Just the hum of the engine and the faint crackle of CB static. Then my high beams caught something up ahead. A splash of color where there shouldn't have been any. A yellow raincoat, standing dead center on the shoulder, facing the treeline. No umbrella, no movement, just a pale outline against the pitch-dark pines. I eased off the throttle, engine brake sighing as I slowed. At first I figured it was some teenager who'd wrecked their car and wandered out looking for help. Happens more than you'd think. But there was no car, not even skid marks. The girl, she couldn't have been older than 10, didn't turn when my lights hit her. Her hair hung soaked down her back, plastered against the yellow rubber. Rain dripped off her sleeves like she'd been standing there for hours. I rolled my window down an inch, cold air cutting across my face. "You all right?" I called out. "You hurt? Need a lift somewhere?" No answer. She just tilted her head slightly toward the trees, like she was listening to something moving out there. I leaned closer to the window. "Hey, do you need help?" That's when she whispered it. "Don't leave me here." Barely audible, but somehow it cut right through the rain and engine noise, like she whispered straight into my ear. I blinked once, and in the time it took for my eyes to close and open, she was suddenly standing right beside my door, face pressed near the glass, eyes wide and shining under the beam of my dash lights. Her skin looked wrong, pale, not sick pale but winter white, like someone who hadn't seen sunlight in years. Her hair clung to her cheeks. Her lips were blue. Instinct made me reach for the lock and pop it open. The passenger seat stayed empty, but the temperature in the cab dropped hard, like someone opened all the doors at once. My breath fogged. The air smelled like wet dirt, fresh turned soil, like after digging in a forest floor. Then came the sound. A soft, wet drip. I looked toward the windshield. A small handprint was pressed against the inside of the glass. Right in front of me, 5 tiny fingers, water smudging down the surface like she just touched it. My stomach dropped. Every inch of my skin crawled. I didn't think. I slammed the window shut and stomped on the gas. The trailer groaned, tires skidding before they caught traction. The whole rig lurched as I pushed it faster than I should have on that road. Ice cracked under the wheels, but the mirrors, God, the mirrors. Every few seconds, between the flash of headlights on wet trunks, I saw that yellow raincoat flicker between the trees, keeping pace with my truck. Not running, not stumbling, just there. Each time my lights swept past a gap in the woods, she was in the next one. Closer to the guardrail, closer to the asphalt. I killed the CB. The static had risen into a whining hiss that buzzed through my skull. 5 miles. 5 solid miles. She stayed in the treeline beside me. When I passed the Skeena River Bridge turnout, she vanished. Just gone. Like she'd stepped backward and let the dark swallow her. I didn't stop until I hit a petrocan nearly 30 minutes later. I parked under the brightest light they had, popped my door open, and let the warm air from the store hit me. I walked around the truck, checking the windshield. The handprint was still there, except the water had dried. What remained was a faint, oily outline, like it came from skin, not rain. Inside the store, I asked the night clerk if any kids had been reported missing recently. He gave me this long look, then nodded slowly. "Yellow coat," he said. I froze. "Yeah." He sighed, leaning on the counter. "Drivers see her. Been years. Some say she's looking for someone to follow her into those woods. Others say she's trying to warn folks not to stop." He scratched his jaw. "Problem is, the ones who do stop don't usually come in here asking about her after." I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. But sometimes, when I'm running Highway 16 in bad weather, I swear I catch a flick of yellow between the trees. Always keeping pace. Always waiting. I've driven long haul for most of my life, hauling steel across the northern corridor from Prince George toward Dease Lake. Anyone who's run that stretch knows how empty it gets after midnight. Long tunnels of black spruce, no towns, no pullouts, nothing but your headlights carving a narrow lane through wilderness that feels older than anything man ever built. It was early fall when this happened. Around 1:15 a.m. mist had been pooling low across the asphalt for miles, thick enough that it felt alive, like it was crawling across the ground instead of drifting. I kept both hands on the wheel, letting the hum of the tires and the steady vibration under my boots guide me more than the road lines. Somewhere past mile 191, I saw an orange glow bleeding between the tree trunks. At first I thought it was a flipped vehicle burning out. Happens off these logging roads sometimes. But the color was too steady, too controlled. A campfire, which made no sense out there. No campsites, no waterways, no trails. Just deep woods and a long history of people going missing. As I eased off the throttle, the glow sharpened. The fire sat in a small clearing maybe 20 yards off the road. 3 figures were standing around it. Standing, not sitting like normal campers. Their backs were to the road, all facing the fire, motionless as fence posts. The flames flickered against their silhouettes, but something about the shadows didn't sit right. They stretched too long, twisted strange angles on the trunks, as if each shadow had its own rhythm separate from the fire. My instincts told me to keep going, but something about the stillness, the wrongness of it, made me tap the brakes and pull onto the shoulder. The moment the air brake sighed, the 3 figures' shadows twitched, like they'd heard it. The night went quiet. Even the wind seemed to stop. I cracked the window an inch. The smell hit first. Wet dirt, cold ash, and something sour beneath it, like old sweat soaked into clothes that hadn't been taken off for days. No laughter, no voices, just the pop of damp wood burning. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped out, and kept one hand on the steel of the door frame in case the ice underfoot slipped me. The fog drifted around my boots, curling like smoke. "Everything all right out there?" I called. No one answered. The figures stayed still, not even shifting their weight. As I got closer to the tree lean, a chill rolled through me, colder than the night air. The fire looked wrong up close. Too bright in the center, too dim at the edges, as if someone was cupping invisible hands around the flame. Then the leftmost figure moved. Slow, deliberate. She turned her head toward me, though her body stayed facing the fire. As she rotated, the light dimmed further, tightening into a weak pulse. Her face came into view. A woman, middle-aged, eyes ringed in soot so dark it looked like bruising. Her cheeks were swollen, streaked like she'd been crying for hours. Her lips were parted, but no sound came out. Just a shape forming silently, like she was mouthing a word directly to me. I stepped back. Gravel crunched under my heel. The other 2 figures turned next, same slow motion, same silent twisting of shadow. They looked like they'd been standing in smoke for days, clothes damp, skin pale under a layer of ash. None of them blinked. The fire sputtered as if someone pressed down on it from above. The light collapsed inward, shrinking to an ember-red bead. I raised the flashlight. The beam hit all 3 figures at once, and they vanished. Not ran, not ducked, not turned away. They were just gone. The clearing went black so fast my eyes couldn't adjust. The fire snuffed out without smoke, without ember, without anything. Just a circle of cold, gray ashes that looked like they hadn't been disturbed in days. My breath fogged hard in front of me. The woods behind me felt heavier, as if someone or several someones were standing just outside the reach of the light, watching. I backed up toward the truck, not turning my back until I had one hand on the door. When I climbed in, the cab felt too warm, too tight, like someone else had been sitting in the passenger seat waiting for me. I locked the doors, threw the rig into gear, and rolled out fast, tires throwing mist behind me. The mirrors showed nothing but darkness swallowing the clearing, but I could feel something moving in it. 5 minutes later, the CB crackled. A low voice whispered through the static. Barely a syllable, nothing clear, just a breath against the receiver. I turned the volume down, heart thudding against the wheel. When I passed back through the area during daylight, I pulled over again out of morbid curiosity. The clearing was empty. No ashes. No stones from a fire ring. No footprints. Just damp leaves and untouched soil. But halfway up a birch tree, scratched into the bark like fingernails dragged with desperation, were the same shapes the woman mouthed at me that night. I didn't stop again near mile 191 after that. Sometimes, though, when fog crawls low across the asphalt and the CB slips into static, I swear I see orange flickers between the trees. Too steady to be headlights, too soft to be sunrise. Just waiting. I've hauled refrigerated freight across the northern plains for years, long enough to know what real winter looks like. The kind that turns the road into glass and the world into a white tunnel. That night, I was running Highway 85 toward Watford City with a full load of produce, trying to beat a storm that had started swallowing the Dakotas mile by mile. Snow hammered the windshield in thick, sideways sheets, each flake hitting like pinpricks against the glass. I had the cab heater on full blast, but the cold still crawled in through the floorboards, numbing my boots. The radio was dead, just static, and the CB was quiet except for the occasional hiss when the wind pushed hard against the antenna. I was alone out there. No taillights, no headlights, just my rig carving a path through an endless wideout. Somewhere past mile marker 218, my headlights caught movement on the shoulder. A man stood there, waving both arms, snow whipping around him like he was standing inside a broken snow globe. No car, no tracks, no sign of a wreck. Just him, bundled in a heavy coat, half frozen. His face wrapped in a red scarf stiff with ice. Normally, I don't stop for hitchhikers, especially in storms, but something about the way he stumbled made my foot hit the brake. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe guilt at seeing someone freezing to death. I eased the rig onto the shoulder, hazards blinking orange into the storm. Before I could lean over to open the door, it jerked wide on its own, and the man climbed in fast, slamming it shut behind him. Snow cascaded onto the mat, melting instantly in the cab's heat. "Thanks, Mike," he said through chattering teeth. My hands tightened on the wheel. My name isn't on the truck. Not on my jacket. Not on anything in the cab. "How do you—" I started. He cut me off with a shaky laugh. "You always were the quiet type." His scarf slipped a little, revealing a jawline smeared with frostbite or soot. I couldn't tell. He looked over at me with eyes that didn't match his voice. Too calm, too knowing. "Do you remember me?" he asked softly. "No," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "Should I?" He chuckled again, lower this time. "We've driven nights like this before. You told me about the way station near Helena, about the runaway ramp on Rogers Pass. You don't remember any of that. I'd never hauled near Helena. I'd never taken Rogers Pass." "I think you've got the wrong guy," I said. Silence filled the cab, thick as the snow outside. The man slowly turned toward me, and the air grew colder. I could see his breath now, white and heavy, even with the heater blowing. "That's what you said last time, too," he whispered. His voice had changed, deeper, older, like someone was speaking through him. The hair on my arms stood straight despite the heat. "You don't remember leaving me behind," he said. "But I remember you." I risked a glance. His face looked different. Swollen, shadowed, dark patches under the skin like bruises blooming from the inside. His eyes seemed clouded over, as if frost was forming beneath the surface. "I never met you," I said quietly. He leaned closer, the cab lights flickering as he moved. "You did. On a night just like this. You told me I'd be fine. You told me help was on the way." A sharp chill crept down my spine. I hadn't told him anything. This was the first time I'd ever seen him, but he spoke with a certainty that made my throat tighten. "Look," I said, trying to sound steady. "If you need a hospital, I can take you to." The seat beside me creaked. I turned fully. It was empty. Snow melted slowly on the leather where he'd been sitting, leaving a wet imprint shaped like a human body. My breathing went shallow. The cab felt wrong. Too quiet. Too cold. The kind of cold that settles inside your bones rather than around them. Then, from the dark space behind the seats, a whisper. "Don't forget me again." I froze, staring into the rearview mirror. The sleeper was pitch black, even though a small LED strip should have been glowing faintly above the bunk. I reached a shaking hand toward the overhead light switch. Before I touched it, the whisper came again, closer, right behind the driver's seat. "You left me. You always leave me." The rig drifted toward the shoulder. I jerked the wheel, tires skidding on ice before catching again. The trailer swayed dangerously. I kept my eyes on the road, refusing to look back. For 20 agonizing miles, the presence stayed behind me. I could hear faint breathing, slow and rattling, like lungs filling with cold water. Every time I checked the mirror, the darkness seemed to pulse. When I reached the first lit gas station in nearly an hour, I pulled in hard, brake screaming. I threw the cab in park and leapt out into the snow, my boots sinking deep. The cold outside felt warmer than what I'd just left. When I finally worked up the courage to open the passenger door again, the cab was empty. Heater still blowing. No footprints. No melted snow on the seat. But on the inside of the window, drawn in condensation, was a message. "Remember me." I wiped it away fast, but the outline stayed, faint and oily, like it came from skin. I haven't picked up another hitchhiker since. I've run logging roads my whole career, roads most folks never see unless they're hauling timber or looking for trouble. That night, I was running empty, heading back toward Fort Nelson after dropping a load at a mill deeper in the interior. It was just after 2 in the morning, the kind of hour when even the forest seems to hold its breath. The air was cold enough to bite. My windshield had a thin crust of frost curling along the edges, and the heater was struggling to keep up. I'd been driving for almost 12 hours straight, and when I spotted a wide turnout on a bend overlooking a shallow ravine, I figured I'd pull over for 10 minutes, stretch my legs, shake the stiffness out of my knees. The moment I stopped, the stillness hit me hard. Logging roads are usually alive with sound. Wind through the treetops, creaking branches, the occasional owl or distant crunch of snow from some animal moving through the brush. But this turnout was silent. Not quiet, silent. The kind of silence that presses into your ears until you start hearing your own heartbeat. I stepped out, boots crunching on frozen gravel. The night air smelled like sap and cold earth. My breath hung in a white cloud before disappearing into the dark. The trees on both sides of the turnout were pitch black walls. My headlights barely made a dent. I walked around the truck, checking the tires, rubbing my hands together for warmth. That's when I saw them. 2 white lights drifting between the pines. At first I thought they were lanterns, maybe loggers or hunters. But no one hikes out there at 2 a.m. And no one moves through those thick pines without sound. The lights swayed gently, side to side, almost curious. They moved too smoothly, no bounce, no shake. Nothing human about the way they traveled. Just a gliding motion, like they were floating on a rail. I narrowed my eyes. The lights zipped left suddenly, fast, then stopped, then darted right again, even faster. No human arm could swing a lantern like that. No machine could shift in silence like that either. The air felt colder on the back of my neck. I backed slowly toward the truck, keeping my eyes on the orbs. They drifted closer, gliding between the trunks, weaving through branches without disturbing a single twig. My nerves spiked. I grabbed my flashlight from the side pocket on the cab door and flicked it on. The beam cut through the mist, hitting the orbs directly. They dimmed immediately, shrinking into small, dull glows. Then they blinked. Not flickered, blinked. Two slow, synchronized winks, like a pair of eyes adjusting to sudden brightness. My stomach twisted. The forest behind them cracked sharply, like a thick branch snapping under heavy weight. Then another crack. Something big was moving out there, heavy enough to shift the ground. A low thud vibrated through the soil under my boots. The orbs drifted apart slightly, as if whatever was behind them was widening its stance. I stepped backward toward the cab door, trying to keep my breathing steady. My flashlight beam trembled as I raised it again. The orbs grew brighter, whiter, like they were reacting to my movement. Then they shot forward a few feet, stopping just beyond the guardrail that separated the turnout from the trees. Too close. Way too close. I froze. They hovered there, motionless, each the size of a fist. The guardrail cast a faint shadow beneath them, but the ground under the orbs remained untouched. No reflection. No disturbance in the snow. A third crack thundered from deeper in the woods, followed by a slow groan. Timber bending under pressure, like something massive was pushing through it. I didn't wait to find out what. I climbed into the cab fast, slammed the door, locked both sides, and turned the key. The engine roared awake. My headlights flared across the turnout, and the orbs drifted above the rail, rising like balloons caught in an updraft. Then they moved, not toward the forest, toward me. I slammed the truck into gear and punched the accelerator. The rig lurched forward, tires spitting gravel. In the mirrors, I saw the orbs glide along the road behind me, keeping perfect pace, not touching the ground. My trailer swung wide as I picked up speed, and the orbs followed, weaving through the air behind me like they were tethered to the truck by invisible strings. At 50 miles an hour, they were still there. The 60 still there. They drifted just beyond my rear bumper, pulsing faintly, like breaths. Every time I checked the mirror, they were closer, never touching the asphalt, never bouncing with the rig's vibrations. When the road curved toward the highway junction, the trees opened up. The orbs slowed, veering back toward the dark pines. They hovered for a moment at the tree line, watching two small pinpoints of light suspended above the brush. Then, as I rounded the bend, they vanished. Not faded, vanished. I drove all the way to Fort Nelson without stopping. When I pulled into the truck stop, my hands were shaking on the wheel. The entire cab smelled faintly of cold sap and wet bark, like the forest had followed me inside. Later that morning, I checked the side of my trailer. Along the length of the aluminum siding, drawn in thin lines of frost, were two long arcs, like something had drifted beside me, tracing patterns as it followed my truck down the road. I've never taken that turnout again, and I haven't stopped on a logging road at night since. I've hauled freight across northern BC for most of my career, long before GPS units started bossing drivers around. The Highway of Tears has always had a reputation, mostly whispered at truck stops between men who pretend they don't believe in anything. I've never been one for ghost stories, but that stretch, it has a way of getting under your skin. This happened just after 3 a.m., on a run from Prince Rupert to Prince George. The air was cold enough to sting, even through the cab's heater. Frost formed thin white feathers across the corners of the windshield, and the outside world was a blur of dark pines and low-lying fog drifting across the asphalt like slow smoke. The CB was dead quiet. No chatter, no warnings, just the soft hiss of static. About 40 minutes past Terrace, my GPS beeped and displayed something I'd never seen there before. Way station 1 kilometer. That stretch has nothing like that. I've driven it hundreds of times. But the map flashed again, insisting, so I eased off the throttle and kept an eye on the right shoulder. Then I saw it. A building appeared through the fog, low, rectangular, glowing pale white under tall lamps. Two open bays with roll-up doors stood lit like a pair of giant eyes. A digital sign buzzed overhead, its letters painfully bright. Trucks proceed, open. I slowed, trying to make sense of it. New construction? Temporary setup? Nothing fit. New stations don't appear without months of signage warning drivers. But the bays were open. The lights were steady. Everything looked official in the way government buildings do, cold, functional, soulless. I rolled inside. The second my rig crossed the threshold, the sound died. And I mean died. The engine still rumbled, but it sounded muffled, like someone had thrown a blanket over the cab. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, steady and harsh, but absolutely nothing else made noise. No fans, no printers, no footsteps, no chatter from an office. I pulled onto the marked line, put the truck in neutral, and set the brake. The digital display that should have shown my weight stayed blank. I waited. Nothing. Not a single person walked out. No officer in reflective gear. No clipboard. No "bring your papers inside." Just that humming, deep and low, like the whole building was breathing. Something wasn't right. I climbed down, boots echoing too loudly on the concrete. The air inside was colder than outside, and it smelled like dust and old wiring. A faint vibration crept through the floor, like distant machinery cycling. "Hello," I called out. My voice hit the walls and came back thin, warped. I walked toward the back office where a window sat open, the glass smeared with fingerprints. A door inside the office was slightly ajar, a sliver of yellow light cutting through the darkness. The hair on my arms rose. Just as I got close enough to knock, the door inside swung open with a slow, steady creak. Someone stepped out, but it wasn't a person. It was a silhouette, flat, black, and impossibly tall. Too tall to be human, and it didn't walk out of the room. It stretched, like the shadow peeled itself off the wall and stood upright. Its head brushed the ceiling. Its arms were long, thin, tapering into points that twitched like antennae. Then the room bent. The edges of the doorframe wavered like heat over asphalt. The humming grew louder, not from the lights, but from the silhouette itself, vibrating the air like a tuned engine. I stepped back. The shadow followed, not walking, not even gliding. It elongated toward me, its stretched form flickering like a slow strobe. One limb reached outward, flattening along the floor, its edge bending at angles no shadow should be able to bend. The concrete under my boots rippled. I stumbled back, breath catching in my throat. The air grew heavy, pressing into my chest. My ears popped, and the lights above flickered violently. I turned and ran. The bay door ahead pulsed like the world beyond it was warping. The shadow slid after me, growing taller, wider, its form cracking through the fluorescent glare. It wasn't chasing in any normal sense, it was expanding, filling space it shouldn't be able to fill. My boots hit the garage threshold, and suddenly I could breathe again. The air snapped back to normal. The lights regained their color. The humming stopped as if someone cut a wire. I spun around. The way station was gone. Not faded. Gone. Just an empty clearing, fog rolling across the gravel. No building, no lights, no bays, no hum. Just dense forest on all sides and a wide patch of disturbed earth where something used to sit. My truck idled alone on that patch. Frost glimmered on the ground. I climbed back into the cab, hands shaking on the wheel. I checked the mirrors. The clearing stayed empty. Nothing moved in the trees. No structures flickered into sight. But something else made my blood run cold. Tire marks. Deep ones. Fresh ones. A set of massive tracks circled the clearing, overlapping the path where I must have driven. But they weren't mine. Wrong tread. Wrong spacing. Wrong weight distribution. Whatever made those tracks was heavier than any rig I'd ever seen. And it had backed in and out of the exact spot where that way station wasn't supposed to be. I left fast and didn't stop until daylight. I showed the GPS log to another driver the next day. He shook his head. "There's no way station on that stretch," he said. "Never has been." But in the frozen mud on the corner of my bumper, smeared in a thin black film, were the words, "Proceed," written backward, like something had pressed against the metal from the inside. I've been driving long haul for more than 20 years, and in that time, I've seen just about everything the road can throw at a man: wideouts, moose collisions, engine fires, even a tornado once. But nothing has stayed with me like what I saw on Highway 97 north of Cache Creek. The kind of thing you don't talk about unless it's 3 in the morning and the only light is the glow of your dash. It was early winter, just past 3 a.m. The sky was moonless, the mountains were black silhouettes, and the pavement looked wet even though the air was below freezing. My rig hummed under me, steady and warm, the heater pushing out dry air that smelled faintly of old rubber and coffee grounds. The CB was dead, just a low hiss, like the static was afraid to speak. I was hauling pallets of dry goods southbound, alone on the highway. Not a single pair of headlights ahead or behind. The shoulder dropped into thick brush on both sides, tall pines pressing in tight as if the forest wanted the road back. That's when I saw movement. At first it was just a flicker in the corner of my high beams, something pale cutting through the darkness. I eased off the throttle, leaning forward, squinting through the thin glaze of frost forming at the edges of the windshield. Then he broke into full view. A man, barefoot, shirtless, running along the shoulder. He was sprinting like hell was behind him, arms pumping hard, legs kicking up gravel, his breath clouding the air in frantic bursts. His skin looked almost blue in the cold. For a moment I thought maybe he'd been in a crash, wandered out of a wreckage in a panic. I slowed more. Jesus? I muttered under my breath, reaching for my phone. Emergency services would take forever to get out here, but I had to call someone. No normal person runs barefoot at 3 in the morning in freezing weather unless they're trying to escape something. When I got within 50 feet, he turned his head toward me. The look on his face rooted me to the seat. Wide eyes, mouth open, not like he was screaming, but like he wanted to and couldn't. His expression was twisted in pure, primal terror. The kind of fear that doesn't come from confusion or injury. The kind of fear that comes from knowing you're about to die. He stumbled once, regained his step, and then he cut hard left, straight into my lane, right in front of the truck. No! I slammed the brakes so hard the trailer fishtailed. The ABS hammered under my boot. The cab shuddered. My coffee thermos launched off the dashboard and hit the floor. The man vanished under my bumper. The truck came to a skidding halt sideways across both lanes. Steam rolled off the hood. My heartbeat pounded in my ears louder than the engine. For a full 5 seconds, I just sat there gripping the wheel, breathing hard, waiting for the shock to settle. Then I climbed down. Cold hit me like a punch. The air smelled sharp, pine sap and frost. My boots crunched over the icy pavement as I walked to the front of the truck, preparing myself for the worst. A body, broken bones, blood on the asphalt. But the road was empty. No body, no clothing, no smear of impact, nothing, just silence. I lifted my flashlight, sweeping it across the ditches, the brush, the trees. No footprints in the snow-dusted gravel. No path he could have taken. No sign he'd ever been there. But when I turned back toward the grill, my breath caught. Wet smears covered the chrome. Not blood, handprints, dozens of them. Fresh, slick, like someone had slapped their palms against the metal again and again, trying to climb upward. Each print trailing more moisture across the grill, like the hands had been soaked in cold water. One set of prints dragged upward toward the hood. Another dragged downward toward the asphalt, before stopping abruptly mid-smear. I stepped back, pulse hammering. My flashlight shook in my hand. The forest pressed in around me, darker than before. Not a single breeze, not a branch swayed. It felt like something was watching, waiting for me to linger. I forced myself back into the cab and locked the doors fast. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely start the engine. As I pulled back onto the road, I checked my mirror. At first, it showed nothing but the white beam of my taillights bouncing off the frost. Then movement, a shape darting along the shoulder, keeping pace with the truck. A human shape, not running this time but gliding like its feet weren't touching the ground. I leaned forward, eyes locked on the glass. When the shape turned its head, the face was the same. The same terror, the same silent scream. I floored it. The truck roared, gears shifting hard. The figure flickered, then vanished into the trees as if pulled backward by invisible hands. I didn't stop again until sunrise. When I finally felt safe enough to inspect the grill in daylight, every handprint had dried into faint, chalky outlines, too many to have belonged to one person. And near the bottom of the bumper, half wiped away by the wind, was a final streak. A message written in long drag marks. Don't let them catch me. I've run that road a dozen times since. But I won't stop on it after midnight. Not ever again. I've been running freight along northern Alberta since before most dispatchers were out of grade school. You get used to long black highways, dead radio zones, and the kind of night that swallows headlights whole. But there's a 40-mile stretch near Peerless Lake I avoid whenever I can. Drivers talk about it in low voices over breakfast, like a confession they don't want overheard. What happened to me there? It started with silence. I was hauling aluminum sheets southbound, close to 2:45 a.m., with fog thick enough to feel like wet cloth pressed against the glass. My CB had been quiet for hours, just the soft hiss of static and the low hum of my engine vibrating through the cab floor. The heater clicked occasionally, pushing lukewarm air that smelled faintly of diesel and old coffee. The road ahead was a pale ribbon in my high beams, fading fast into the fog. Not a single reflector shone back. No signs, no mile markers, just white nothingness. Then the CB burst alive, a violent crackle, like someone ripping a sheet of aluminum next to my ear. I jumped, gripping the wheel tight, heart hammering. The static swelled, loud enough to drown out my engine. Then, cutting through it, a woman's voice, faint, breathless, whispering numbers. 4, 7, 2, 9, 4, 7. She repeated them, each sequence quieter, like she was drifting away from the mic. I reached for the handset. Break 1 to 9, you copy? You all right out there? The static shifted. Warmer. Closer. Like the speaker pressed right against the grill of the radio. 4, 7 now. Her voice fractured mid-syllable. Then suddenly it wasn't one voice anymore. It was several. All layered. All whispering at once. Male, female, old, young. A chorus through a broken throat. Help us. You passed us. Don't leave the road. A chill crawled up my spine. Past who? There hadn't been a soul on that highway for at least an hour. I slowed to 70, scanning the shoulder. My wipers dragged across a thin smear of moisture, squeaking with each pass. Fog thickened until it looked like I was driving into wool. Then my mirror caught movement. A figure standing on the gravel shoulder. My pulse kicked hard. I flicked my eyes back to the road instinctively, but every second felt like gravity pulling my gaze to the mirror. I looked again. A woman, standing perfectly still, head tilted, as if her neck had given up halfway through a question. One arm raised toward me, not waving, more like pointing or reaching. I tapped the brake. The CB hissed louder. The voices surged all at once, overlapping like a crowd whispering through a tunnel. Don't look back. The words slammed into the cab like they'd been spoken from the bunk right behind my seat. Clear. Urgent. Not whispered, but commanded. I clenched the wheel and forced my eyes forward. The mirror felt radioactive. Every instinct screamed to check it just once, just to confirm she was still there or gone. But the CB speaker breathed in my ear like someone leaning close enough to fog the microphone. Don't look. Don't turn. Don't let her see you. I eased onto the throttle, pulling the rig back to highway speed. My hands were slick with sweat despite the cold air blowing from the vents. The fog swallowed everything but the narrow path in front of my headlights. The tapping started 3 minutes later. A soft, rhythmic tap-tap-tap on the back wall of the cab, like fingernails against sheet metal. I swallowed hard. Tap-tap-tap. Not fast. Not frantic. Patient. I focused on my breathing, keeping one eye on the road, one on the faint glow of my dash. The CB crackled again, low, guttural layers of breathing, like dozens of people huddled too close to the microphone. Tap, tap, tap. The sound traveled, higher up the cab wall, then across, then lower, like someone or several someones were exploring the contours of my truck from the outside. Something brushed the passenger door. A soft gliding sound, like a palm dragging along the metal. Fog pressed against the windshield so dense I couldn't see 10 feet ahead. My headlights hit nothing but swirling white. Tap tap, scratch, tap tap tap. The scratch was worse. Light, testing, like something tracing lines into the paint with a fingertip. The CB voices rose again. You passed us? We were right there. We watched you. The cab temperature plummeted. Frost formed at the edges of the windshield so quickly I heard it crackle. My breath fogged in front of me. Something hit the back of the trailer, hard enough to shake the whole rig. I gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles stung. The tapping stopped. Silence. Then another whisper, just one voice now. A woman. The same one from before. Softer. Almost gentle. Don't leave the road. I didn't understand why, until a split second later the fog broke and revealed a curve I never saw coming. I swerved. Tires screamed. The trailer fishtailed so hard I thought it would flip. Gravel spit from the shoulder as I fought the wheel with both hands. The rig groaned and straightened, barely missing the drop-off into a ravine. If I had looked in the mirror, if I had slowed even a little, I would have gone over. I kept driving until dawn painted thin streaks of orange through the clouds. When I finally pulled into a rest stop, I climbed out, legs shaky, breath still uneven. The back of my cab was covered in prints. Hundreds of them, some large, some small, all smeared into the frost. Some dragged downward, some upward, and some circled the windows like eyes pressed close, watching. The CB hasn't worked since. I've been running the northern corridor long enough to know when something on the roadside doesn't belong. You get an instinct for it, the shape of a vehicle, the angle of the lights, the way the trees bend around a crash. That night, around 1:30 in the morning, I was headed east toward Vanderhoof, hauling empty pallets after a long unload. Fog hung low across the highway, thick and yellow in the beams, and the asphalt glistened with a thin layer of melt that made the truck hum louder under my boots. It was cold enough for frost to form on the mirrors, but not cold enough to keep the fog from drifting like smoke. I spotted the van about a quarter-mile ahead. A white cargo model, nose down in the ditch on the right side. The hazards blinked weakly, like the battery was dying. At first I thought it was abandoned. Drivers slide off into ditches out here all the time. But then I saw the windows. They were fogged from the inside. Someone was breathing in there. I eased onto the shoulder, my tires crunching against gravel hidden under wet leaves. The ditch dipped low, and the van's back wheels hovered just above the ground like it had gone down hard. I flipped on my hazards and grabbed my flashlight, stepping out into air that smelled like cold pine and wet earth. As I approached, I saw streaks in the fogged glass. Drag marks, as if someone had pressed their hands against every window. The closer I got, the more the hair on my arms rose. The inside of the van was moving, not rocking from the wind, not shifting from weight. Moving, like something inside was scrambling from wall to wall. I swallowed and knocked on the driver's window. The van shook violently, not a tremor, a full-body jolt like something threw itself against the interior. My flashlight beam bounced off the glass as another thud hit the back door. I stepped away, boots slipping in the mud as the van rocked a second time. "Hey!" I called out. "If you can hear me, I'm here to help." The hazards flickered faster, like a pulse. I circled toward the rear. The back doors were chained with an old padlock, but the left one hung slightly open, like the impact had bent the latch. I approached slowly, heart pounding in my ears. Fog swirled around my legs, and the forest felt too quiet, like the trees were listening. The door creaked open another inch. A small, trembling hand reached out. A woman crawled out onto the mud, her hair matted to her face, her clothes torn. Bruises covered her arms and neck, dark and swollen. She didn't look at me. She looked behind her, back into the van, eyes wide with a terror that made my breath catch. "Don't let him see me," she whispered. Her voice cracked like she hadn't spoken in days. She grabbed my pant leg, fingers icy cold, trembling hard. Her lips moved again, but her voice failed her. She shook her head violently, like she was trying to wake herself from a nightmare. I knelt down fast, reaching for her shoulders. "It's all right. I've got you. We need to get you." I blinked. She was gone. My hands closed on nothing but cold air. The mud where she'd lain was untouched. No footprints. No drag marks. No sign she'd ever been there. I froze, breath hanging in front of me. The only sound was the weak tick of the van's hazards. Fog pressed against the ditch, swallowing everything more than 10 feet away. Slowly, because I had no choice, I lifted my flashlight and pointed it into the back of the van. My stomach dropped. Handprints covered the inside walls. Hundreds of them. Overlapping, smeared, stretched, some so small they looked like a child's. They coated the windows, the metal walls, even the ceiling. Layers and layers of frantic claw marks, all pressed from the inside. The chains on the door rattled softly, though there was no wind. My beam drifted deeper. A shape moved in the far corner. I stepped back instantly, slipping on the mud, my boots scraping against wet gravel. The shape hunched low, shifting like it was crawling toward the open door. Then it stopped, frozen in place. Not hiding, waiting. The hazy light from my flashlight trembled across the interior. The handprints seemed to shimmer, as if fresh moisture was still drying on the glass. Then something spoke. Not from inside the van. From behind me. "Don't let him see me." The voice was right at my ear. Same tone. Same tremble. Same woman. I spun around. Nothing. Only fog drifting past the ditch and the faint sound of my truck idling on the shoulder. The van thumped once behind me, soft, like a fist against metal. I bolted. By the time I climbed back into my cab, my hands were shaking so hard I dropped the keys. The forest behind the van looked darker than before, like something tall was standing between the trees. As I pulled away, my headlights swept across the ditch one last time. The van wasn't shaking anymore, but the woman was standing beside it. Only this time, she wasn't looking at the van. She was staring straight at me, and her breath was fogging the outside of the glass. I've been hauling freight across the Pacific Northwest for nearly 2 decades, and fog has always been the one thing that rattles me. Snow, ice, wind, those you can handle with experience and a steady grip. But fog hides things. Fog makes the world smaller, tighter, like the darkness is pressing its face against the glass. And on the night this happened, the fog was thick enough to feel alive. It was close to 3 in the morning, somewhere along Highway 101 between Coos Bay and Florence. That stretch curves through dense forest. The pines growing so close to the road, they look like they're leaning in to listen. My trailer was loaded with lumber, about 70,000 pounds, and the weight made every curve feel heavier than usual. The air was damp inside the cab, and the heater pushed out that familiar smell of warm dust and stale coffee. Fog drifted across the pavement in sheets, sometimes so dense my high beams dissolved into white soup. I slowed to 50, then 45, letting the hum of the engine guide me more than the road lines. My wipers squeaked across the glass. The CB was dead silent. No chatter, no warnings, just a faint hiss beneath the fog. Then the fog ahead of me shifted. At first, it was just a darker patch in the mist. A shape, a vertical smear that didn't belong. I eased off the throttle, leaning forward, eyes narrowing through the glare. My headlights swept over the asphalt, white lines, guardrail, trees, and then finally over the figure. It stood dead center on the road. Tall, thin, blacker than the fog around it, like a silhouette cut from the darkness itself. It faced away from me, but its posture was strange. Too rigid, too still. No sway from the wind, no movement at all. Just a perfectly upright shadow. I hit the horn once, a short warning blast. It didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't turn, didn't raise a hand. Nothing. My horn echoed through the fog, swallowed almost instantly by the trees. I slowed even more, crawling now. I couldn't slam the brakes. 70,000 pounds doesn't stop on a dime in wet air. My palms were slick against the wheel, and the vibration of the engine under my boots felt sharper, like the truck was nervous too. I honked again, longer this time. Still no reaction. As I got closer, My headlights brightened the fog around it, but the figure stayed pitch black. No reflection, no details, no texture. Just darkness in the shape of a man, maybe 7 feet tall, walking perfectly along the center line. Only it wasn't walking. His legs didn't move. It glided, smoothly, steadily, like its feet weren't touching the ground at all. Every instinct screamed to avoid it. I flicked my blinker, eased left, and tried to pass slowly on the opposite lane, keeping as much distance as possible. The figure drifted with me. It didn't turn its head. It didn't shift its shoulders. It just slid sideways, still facing forward, blocking my path like it knew exactly what I was trying to do. I jerked the wheel right, tires skidding onto the shoulder. Gravel spat underneath, the trailer swaying. The fog thickened, swallowing the figure for a moment, and then it was right beside my lane again, gliding, always centered, always upright. I felt sweat drip down my neck despite the cold. My breath came short, fogging the cab with each exhale. My headlights kept trying to carve the thing into something recognizable, but the shadow rejected every detail, every shape, every hint of human form. "Come on," I muttered under my breath, though I didn't expect an answer. "Move." The shape didn't move. It drifted. Finally, when the shoulder widened, I downshifted, gripped the wheel, and accelerated. The engine roared, the trailer pulled tight, and the fog blurred around me as I pushed past 60, then 65. The shadow held its place on the center line until the last possible second. Then it turned. Not the whole body, just its head. A smooth, impossible swivel. Slow, deliberate, until the blank face aligned with my passenger side. The fog behind the glass distorted. My pulse thundered in my ears. My right hand tightened involuntarily on the wheel as something pressed against the passenger window. A smear. Not a handprint. Not a face. Just a dark, formless pressure against the glass, dragging across it like wet paint. The window rattled. The fog thinned enough for my headlights to catch what looked like a hollow indentation where eyes should have been. Then the shadow dissolved. It collapsed inward, folding into the mist, breaking apart like smoke under a fan. The smear on the window stretched, pulled thin, and vanished with it. My truck shot forward into empty road, leaving nothing behind but swirling white. I didn't slow down for 10 straight miles. My hands went numb on the wheel. The heater clicked louder. The cab smelled suddenly colder, sharper, like the scent of wet metal. Every curve felt like a blur of white, black, and panic. When the fog finally broke and the sky opened into a pale smear of starlight, I eased onto the shoulder and killed the engine. The ticking of hot metal filled the silence. My passenger window was clean, too clean. Every other surface on the truck was damp with fog, but the glass on that one side was bone dry, like something had wiped it down from the outside. A chill dug into my spine. I stepped out slowly, gravel crunching under my boots, and walked around the truck with my flashlight. The forest was quiet, heavy with dew. My breath smoked in the air. When I reached the passenger side, I froze. On the lower corner of the glass, faint but unmistakable, were streaks, tiny drip lines, descending from where the smear had been, like condensation sliding down a pane. But it wasn't condensation. It was soot, black, powdery, smudged into thin trails. I wiped it with my thumb. It stained my skin gray. I climbed back into the cab and didn't stop again until I reached Lincoln City. Even now, whenever fog hits thick across the road, I check the mirrors more than I should. Because sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I see something dark glide along the center line, waiting for headlights. I've been running freight across northern British Columbia for 16 years, and if there's one stretch that gets under every driver's skin, it's the section near Morristown. Something about those forests feels wrong at night. Too dense, too quiet, like the trees absorb sound instead of letting it pass. I've had moments there where the hairs on my arms lifted even with the heater blasting full. But nothing compares to what happened 3 winters ago. It was just after 2:10 a.m. I was hauling dry goods to Prince Rupert, my rig humming steady underneath me. The night was cold enough that frost began forming thin white veins along the inside edges of the windshield. I cracked my window slightly to keep it from fogging up. The air that rushed in smelled like wet pine and something faintly metallic. There wasn't another set of headlights for miles. The road curved through thick black forest on both sides, and the silence between CB static bursts felt unnatural. That's when I heard it, crying. Not loud, just a soft, broken sound drifting in with the cold air. At first I thought it was the wind catching through the branches, or maybe an animal hurt somewhere deep in the woods. But the longer I listened, the more distinct it became. It wasn't the howl of something wild. It was a woman sobbing. I slowed the truck to a crawl, leaning out my window, trying to catch the direction. The sound grew clearer, cutting through the hum of my engine. Soft, shaking breaths, whispered words I couldn't quite catch. I eased onto the shoulder and killed my high beams, letting the forest settle into a darker shape. The crying came from the right side, somewhere just beyond the first row of pines. Reluctantly, I grabbed my flashlight, stepped down from the cab, and walked toward the treeline. My boots crunched over frost-coated gravel. The cold bit through my jacket like teeth. I swept the beam through the trees, thick trunks, bare branches, underbrush glistening with ice. Then I saw her. A woman stood between two pines, maybe 20 feet in. She wore torn jeans and a gray hoodie soaked through with frost. Her hair hung in wet strands across her face. She didn't look up. She just shook, small tremors running through her shoulders like she was freezing. When my light hit her, she flinched but didn't run. "Ma'am," I called out quietly. "Are you hurt?" She lifted her head. Her breath fogged out in heavy bursts, like she'd been crying for a long time. Her lips were pale. Her eyes were red. And yet, she didn't look confused or lost. She looked desperate. "Please," she whispered. "Help me find the rest." The rest. I stepped closer, scanning the darkness behind her. "Is someone else out here?" She nodded once, sharp and afraid. I raised my flashlight, letting the beam cut deeper between the trees. That's when I saw them. Figures. At least 7 or 8 of them, half hidden behind the trunks. Silent, unmoving, their clothes blended with the darkness. Hoodies, jackets, torn coats hanging off rigid frames. They stood spaced apart but aligned, like they'd been arranged in a pattern I couldn't see. Their faces were buried in shadow except for their eyes. Their eyes glinted like wet glass. Not glowing, reflecting, but reflecting what? My flashlight wasn't pointing at most of them, yet their eyes shone faintly, like they were catching light from a source deeper in the forest. My chest tightened. The woman turned to me fully now, stepping closer. Her hands were trembling violently. "Please," she said again. "Don't leave us here again." The word again punched through me. My mind raced. Again? I've never. A sound cut me off. Branches snapping. Not a twig. Not a single limb. Several. Snapping all at once. Sharp cracks echoing like ribs breaking under pressure. The figures behind her shifted forward, one synchronized step. Then another. Their movements were too smooth, too exact, like they were following a signal only they could hear. The woman's expression twisted with fear. "They're coming." I stepped back immediately, boots sliding over the frozen dirt. The closest figure leaned into the light, its face smeared with streaks of mud or ash, features twisted like they'd been pressed into place by hands instead of formed naturally. Its eyes gleamed brighter now, reflecting nothing I could understand. Another step. The sound of cracking branches swelled around me, circling through the forest. Something deeper moved behind them, something large. The air grew colder, thick enough to sting my lungs with every inhale. My flashlight shook in my hand. The woman grabbed my sleeve suddenly, her fingers ice cold. "Run," she breathed. "Please." Her grip tightened, then faltered. In one blink, she wasn't touching me anymore. In the next blink, she wasn't there at all. She had vanished so completely the beam of my light passed straight through the space she'd occupied. The figures behind her lurched in unison, stepping closer with the same smooth, gliding motion. Their eyes flashed like shards of glass catching a distant flame. I turned and ran. My boots hammered the frozen ground. The fog swallowed the trees around me. Something thrashed in the brush to my left. Something heavy enough to shake the entire line of branches. Another crack echoed from the right. Then another. Like they were all around me. I burst from the tree-line and sprinted for the truck. My keys slipped in my frozen fingers. I fumbled, cursed, fumbled again. The forest behind me erupted in snapping wood and rushing footsteps. Too many footsteps, too fast to be human. I flung the door open, dove inside, slammed it shut, and locked it. My breath fogged the windshield in frantic bursts. For a split second, the night outside was silent except for my heartbeat. Then they appeared. Dozens of figures stood at the edge of the forest, just beyond the shoulder. All of them staring, eyes gleaming like tiny mirrors. None of them breathed. None of them moved. Until they did. They stepped forward together, perfectly synchronized, like a single body with many limbs. I threw the truck into gear and floored it. Gravel spit behind me. My trailer swung. Fog enveloped everything. In my mirror, the figures drifted back toward the trees, fading into darkness as if the forest was swallowing them whole. The last thing I saw before they vanished was the woman, standing still, watching me leave, her breath fogging the air. Even though the night was far too cold for the dead to breathe.